Hi, thanks for listening to this podcast. The way we approach our physical comfort and the way we approach our emotional comfort are remarkably similar. When things get a bit uncomfortable, we try our best to avoid them. This can be a surprisingly unhelpful idea. People adapt in multiple ways, but the solution I'm discussing in this podcast is information outlined in Scott Carney's book called What Doesn't Kill Us. Without giving too much away, I hope you enjoy this podcast. As you know, or might not know, I was just in Cape Town. Everybody know that I was in Cape Town. I was in Cape Town for a few days, and the reason that I went down to Cape Town, you won't need a book now, you're not going to need to write anything. The reason why I went down to Cape Town to go swim in the ocean. Yes. The ocean in Cape Town is 15 degrees centigrade in Camps Bay. I'm not sure how much it is in Durban. I think it's probably around 24. Yeah, it's quite significantly colder. But the whole reason was to go down to swim in the cold water, and it was quite an experience. What actually happened is I went up to on Friday. I went up to the Magaliesberg Mountains in Rustenburg. There's a river that I know up there where, because I know where it is, I can go swimming there. But it wasn't cold enough. It was just the mountain water, the river water was cool, but it wasn't cold. I was looking for cold water. And then I thought I'd just go down to Cape Town. It's the coldest water that I know that I can find here in South Africa. There's apparently a place in Pretoria that has a cryotherapy room where you can go into a chamber where they pump in liquid nitrogen, and they take the temperatures way, way, way down, but you can only spend 2 or 3 minutes in that because it's so cold before it starts to get frostbite on your skin very quickly and stuff like that. So there's a reason why I'm talking about this cold stuff, and I just want to go into it a little bit. So just as an introduction, I was not aware that in 1931 there were 2 scientists who discovered how different people react to different circumstances. And the way that they did that, they had a kind of a chemical spill in their laboratory of some stuff went into the air. And one guy was able to taste it, and the other guy wasn't able to taste the chemical in the air. And what they discovered is that approximately 25% of the population has got more taste buds than the other 75% of the population, and can taste food flavors and all of those kind of things more significantly, which I thought was quite a mundane fact. I mean, who really cares? There's not really anything that you can do about it, but it's just an interesting fact that highlights sometimes the difference between people. There's a thing that people are born with, or that they are taught, and it's called perfect pitch. Something that I've spoken about a little bit before. It's a thing that musicians have. So, if I'm not mistaken, it was Mozart was born with perfect pitch. It gives the musician the ability to identify perfect pitch in any bandwidth of music. And as someone who performs, to be able to instantly pinpoint where you are, if you're in A sharp or C flat or whatever it is, and go straight into it, is quite an advantage just by hearing the notes. Now, some people are born with it, who never realize that they have this ability, so it never develops. And the interesting thing is that this ability can only be developed, if I'm not mistaken, up until the age of 5. And if it's not developed by the age of 5, it cannot be learned. There's a school in Japan that specializes in training babies and small children to learn perfect pitch. So it's a skill that can be taught and that can be learned. They say that the Oriental languages, because of the way that they are spoken, are also more conducive to people learning perfect pitch. Apparently they rely more on harmonics in the way that they speak. I can't remember the exact details. What is really significant about this, perhaps something in the research that I did on this topic, was that these skills can be learned, but if they are not used, they atrophy. Now, I know that they've done quite a lot of research on meditators, people who meditate, Buddhist monks who have been meditating for many years. And they've noticed that the grey matter in the brain grows significantly, and even from a little bit of meditation can begin to grow, and those neural pathways strengthen. Well, the interesting thing about this is that if you don't continue to practice meditation, that part of the brain will atrophy and go back to where it was. The research that they did was with London cab drivers, the little black cabs. The little cab drivers have to memorize a tremendous amount of street networks in London before they are given a license. I don't know if anybody knows about that. It's a thing called the knowledge. You can go and research it. They've done documentaries on it. They have to learn and write an exam of pretty much of the whole of London so that they can drive around without a map. It's extensive. And they've done MRIs on these guys' brains, and they've shown how their brains grow through this work. And then they've done MRI on these guys' brains once they've retired, and all of that growth has just gone back to the way that it is. So when you learn something, you need to work at it. I remember when I first started playing the guitar, and I stopped playing for 10 years. I could still play a few of the basics, but a lot of the technique I had lost. A lot of the tricks and the intricacies. I remember at that time I could pick up pretty much any kind of instrument and squeeze a tune out of it. You know, now not so much. It's almost like that ability waned a little bit. So another example would be if you think about driving around in a new city with a GPS versus a map book. Now, I remember driving around with a map book, and when I used to drive around with a map book, you learn where you are, and you get to know exactly how you're getting where you're going and how you're coming back. But with a GPS, it's a very, very different story, because you're just watching that little arrow, and you just follow that little arrow. And I promise you, I've been in Joburg for a year and a half now. My street knowledge of Joburg is pathetic, because I go everywhere with the GPS. It's so easy and it's so convenient. I pop it on the dashboard and I put my address in, and off I go. Now, in our society, in the last 100 years, the last 50 years, we've gone into they call it a kind of a homeostasis, where everything is air conditioned. We don't get too cold. The fabrics that all our clothes are made out of are all technical fabrics. So the idea being that we are kept in a comfort zone. All the food that we have access to, we don't have to go hunting anymore. We don't have to go looking for food anymore. Everything is available to us. We can basically just sit back, and that kind of desperate need for survival is no longer part of our lives. And just to go a little bit of a step back, something that I thought was quite interesting. Has anybody had their wisdom teeth removed? I've had my wisdom teeth removed. The wisdom teeth are there from a time where we used to have to chew on roots and fibers, when our jaws were completely a different shape. But now, because interestingly, I didn't even know this, because we cook our food, it makes it easier to digest. It's higher in carbohydrates, which is why we struggle with our weight. We don't need strong jaws anymore, so the wisdom teeth have got nowhere to go. I mean, I had to have mine surgically removed, because what they do is they were pushing the rest of my teeth skew and causing me a lot of pain, because I didn't need to chew on anything. I didn't need to develop that part of my jaw. Now, if we look at survival, and we're talking about the cold, there are 4 different groups of people that were examined when it came to the way that they survived the cold. In Lapland, which is, I think, your area up in the top of the North Pole, Finland, Norway, in the Scandinavian countries up there, is it close to the North Pole? Yeah, very, 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 very cold. And they went and had a look at and did some tests on the Lapps who looked after reindeer. That's kind of what their herds out there. Like we've got sheep and cows up here, they got reindeers up there. And they wanted to see how these guys survived in those kind of temperatures. We're talking snow, we're talking very, very, very cold. And these guys would sleep at night in the snow, which to me is quite mind-boggling. You think if you're looking after a herd of reindeer and it's nighttime and you go to sleep and you're sleeping in the snow. Now, normally what would happen is you would get hypothermia and you would die of exposure. But not these guys. This is how they live. This is what they do all the time. They have adapted to the cold. In fact, what happens is, now, when you are exposed to the very cold, if you drop into cold water, what happens is all the blood leaves your extremities, your arms and your legs, and the veins constrict, and the blood circulates around your core to keep your core temperature warm so that you don't die. Your core temperature has to remain a specific temperature. What they found with these guys is that their core temperature actually dropped, got colder, but they didn't die. What happened, the best that they can see is these guys have adapted to just not worrying about the cold. If it's cold, if it's not cold, so what? And this is how they survive in these temperatures with that kind of mindset. It's like the cold doesn't matter. Cold doesn't affect us. Cold doesn't bother us. And there was another group of people, the Inuits, Eskimos. And Eskimos are a different crowd. And something quite interesting while I was looking at the stuff that was quite interesting to me is everybody's talking about banting diet. All these guys eat out there are whale meat, whale blubber, seal meat, high fat meat, because these animals that live out in these very cold temperatures have got a lot of fat on them. I imagine reindeers, I don't know if there are any reindeers out there, but there's moose, caribou, fish, salmon, that's all that they eat. They eat primarily meat. And they have a very short summer, and in their summers they eat berries and roots and that kind of stuff. They get all the vitamins and all the nutritions and everything that they need to survive in those extreme temperatures from meat. And a little bit of fruit and veggies in their summer. It's like a 4-month period of summer for them. So they've adapted to the cold, which is quite interesting because they actually, their core temperature drops a little bit so that their extremities stay warm, so that their hands stay warm, that they can do the work and do the things that they need to do outside in those cold temperatures. I went online to do a little bit more research than some of the stuff that I was reading, and there's very limited information available around this stuff. A lot of the research into thermogenesis, which is the stuff about staying warm that they look at, only started in around 2009. So the information is still new. There isn't a lot of information around this stuff. People are talking about genetics and but I'll talk about that a little bit later. The Aborigines in Australia sleep outside in 0-degree weather out in the outback, and all that they will sometimes do is put on a few bushes to stop the wind blowing. And they don't have blankets or shelters or any of those kind of, they sleep out in the open. And what they discovered is that their external temperature becomes icy cold. They become icy cold to the touch, but they don't lose any core body temperature. So there's a lot of where the veins constrict, not to allow the blood to the surface, and that keeps their core temperature warm. And then our Khoisan from down in the Cape were very similar, but except their skin stayed warm. So their skin didn't go cold like the Aborigines did. Their skin stayed warm, but they were also able to stay warm in the Kalahari in 0-degree temperatures. So what this research is showing is that there are different ways that people's bodies have adapted to changing temperatures and changing cold. There's a tremendous amount of, there's quite a high volume of information that I've read about this stuff, and I couldn't find where I saw this research, but there was a professor who got 6 overweight guys in a hospital ward. He wanted to do a test on them, and I think it was over a period of either 4 months or 6 months, where he kept the temperature down in the ward down to 15. It was about 15 degrees, if I'm not mistaken. 15 degrees is cold. The temperature we're at the moment is about 26 degrees, 27 degrees. So 15 degrees is cold. It's like sitting in a cold room the whole day. And these guys lost weight. They lost weight because their bodies were burning calories and kilojoules to stay warm. I mean, it's a bit realistic here where we are in South Africa to go lock yourself away in a cold room to go on diet. But it's just part of how people adapt to their environment and how much our society has changed to stop those processes taking place. So it almost becomes reliant on us, and we're talking thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary coding that is there. So our systems aren't reliant on one particular strategy to adapt to something like being able to withstand the cold. They say that there's four. In spite of what I've just said, if you break it down into perhaps a little bit more, I hate to say scientific terms because I'm not a scientist, but more clinical terms, four strategies that the human body uses to adapt to the cold. And the one is increased metabolism, so that's shivering. When you shiver, your body's actually creating warmth, increasing your metabolism. Some kind of passive metabolic mechanism. I don't really know what that is. That was just the terminology that was used, but I kind of have an intuitive idea, I think, what they're talking about. Vasoconstriction, which is the veins shrinking, and then white fat insulation, putting on weight. And I remember when I was very overweight, it was always very hot. Always hot. Always looking to cool down. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And then they discovered in 2009, around that time, what they call brown fat. Now, babies are born with brown fat because they can't do any exercise or they can't do anything to keep themselves warm. It was thought that the stuff just burns off, because what brown fat does is brown fat burns off white fat. And what they've discovered with all of this cold exposure is that you generate more brown fat, which burns white fat. In the 1600s, when the Americans were colonizing America, when the Europeans were colonizing America, there's one story, as far as I understand, the mascot for Boston, Massachusetts is an Indian brave wearing a little loincloth, because the settlers were there in the early 1600s freezing their ass off, and some Indian dude walked into the camp wearing just a loincloth in the snow and the cold. And apparently what the Native Americans would do is they would expose themselves and their children from a very early age to the cold. So they'd dump the babies in the snow from an early age to get them used to the cold. So continued exposure over a period of time. And you'll remember something that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, is that this is something you can work on, and this is something that you can practice, but if you stop working on it and you stop practicing it, you'll lose the ability. I hate to be corny and drag this in, but recovery is exactly the same. If you stop doing the work and if you stop applying yourself to spiritual life, your recovery will atrophy as well. Now, I want to read something. I want to read something to you. There's things that we can do as humans to control our. They call it the autonomic nervous system. Things that you can do to control your metabolism. And there are a few examples. The one is, if you are shivering, to stop shivering. That's you actually changing the way that you react to a physical stimulus. I mean, how do you describe what you do in your mind to somebody? You just say, you're shivering, stop shivering. But there's a process that takes place in your mind. If you're sneezing, stop yourself from sneezing. Now, this is a way that you can control your autonomic nervous system. Control your bladder. That's another way of doing it. I've heard, I'm not sure that if you're ticklish, you can make the decision not to be ticklish if somebody's tickling you, and then to hold your breath at the point where you want to breathe. These are all decisions that we are able to make and that we are capable of making now. Let me read this little section to you. Does anybody have one of these? Kindle. I cannot recommend them enough. This is the most amazing device. I've got 150, 200 books on this thing. Absolutely fantastic. If you like to read, I strongly suggest getting yourself one of these. Let me read quickly. The autonomic nervous system divides itself into two interrelated components. Let me just see if I can get the definition out of here of autonomic. Just give me a second, please. Oh, there we go. Autonomic unconscious relating to the autonomic nervous system. So I'll just read again from the beginning. The autonomic nervous system divides itself into two interrelated components. First, the sympathetic nervous system, which controls the fight or flight response. If you were a car, the sympathetic system would be the gas pedal. It gives you short-term boosts of energy, activates the adrenal gland, triggers dilation and vasoconstriction. The parasympathetic nervous system controls the opposite responses, sometimes called feed and breed actions. This is the equivalent of the car's brake pedal. The parasympathetic nerves act on digestion, salivation, arousal, and tears. Both systems are involved in breathing, and the right techniques can help strengthen both sides of the nervous system. In the same way that someone in a gym can focus on a particular muscle group during exercise, different breathing routines targeting different aspects of the nervous system. Let me just say that again. Different breathing routines target different aspects of the nervous system. The basic breathing techniques of holding your breath after hyperventilating acts mostly upon the parasympathetic nerves. The sympathetic system only starts to kick in closer to the moment when you are struggling to stop yourself from gasping. And this is often best to train with breath out holds. Breath in holds are for better getting your absolute maximum number of push-ups or attention duration, but are less efficient in cracking into your nervous system. So there's two things that are taking place here, and more than that, if you think about it, is how you withstand extreme changes in your environment is very much dependent on you, and there are a number of ways that you can adapt to what is happening around you, whether it be external stimulus, and I want to throw in there whether it be internal stimulus, because I find exactly the same thing. If you respond to the cold by shivering and running indoors and turning on the heater and putting on your goose down jacket and warm clothes, if you respond to anxiety and stress in exactly, you look like you're going to fall asleep. Anxiety and stress. If you respond to anxiety and stress in the same way by running away from it and trying to avoid it, you are never going to be able to manage it or learn how to live with higher, more intense levels of those kind of things, because anxiety and stress is a part of everyday life. And the more you prepare yourself and the better equipped you are to withstand the pressure, the more pressure you can accept and deal with, and the more that you can accomplish and get done, if that's what you want to do. So there's the external and the internal, which are both very similar. And then there's the autonomic nervous system. The fight or flight, or feed or breed, is quite a terrible way of putting it, which are both controlled by breathing techniques. Did you just stop yourself from sneezing? So I've spoken about the breathing exercises before, and this is just a little bit of a continuation on that, and I'll explain it again. So meditation, which is primarily focused on breathing, and if you want to know more about meditation, you can speak to me, and I'll give you more insight into what you can do about that and how it affects the way that you feel. How you cope with external stimulus like weather changes, how you cope with internal stimulus like anxiety and stress and difficult emotions. And then how you can strengthen that part of your ability to cope with stuff in your face, or physical urges, sexual urges, those kind of things, if they are uncontrollable. And that is with breathing. Now, the breathing technique is at 30 hyperventilated breaths. So I'll do just a few quick ones. So it's as deep in as possible, and then you just allow the air to go out. Do 30 of those. And on the last exhale, you hold your breath. And you hold your breath for as long as you can. When you can't hold your breath anymore, that's where you're pushing that limit of the autonomic nervous system. When you can't anymore, you take one deep in-breath and hold it for 10 to 15 seconds. And then you do that 3 times. Directly after that, cold shower. Jump into the cold and spend as much time as you can in the cold. Again, this is something that needs a little bit of work over a very short period of time. I would say within a week of doing this, you will start to feel the benefits of the exercise. And if you continue to do it, you will continue to experience the benefits of the exercises. And when you stop doing it, you will no longer experience the benefits of doing the exercise. I mentioned in the beginning that I was down in Cape Town, and I met purely by accident a group of people that do cold water swimming every morning. Every morning they're in the ocean and they spend a minimum of 20 minutes in the cold water. And I was in the cold water every morning. And the one day that I went in, I really went in long. And I wasn't in there swimming laps in the tidal pool. I was just in the water and I was just parking off it. It was very cold. And I must have felt like half an hour. I really just stayed in the water. It was quite an experience. And I got out and I dried off and I went and had a breakfast. And it was almost, I had a physical response to the cold. Because the idea is with this kind of prolonged cold exposure, if you really do it, is just to dress warmly afterwards. And I didn't. And I became more cold and more shaky. So really kind of like took it to the very edge. And then I went and did it the next day, but I was a little bit more kind of prepared. So what my experience with this has been is that doing this kind of thing and looking at this kind of thing doing the research and trying to understand is I'm able to push my own limits of what I'm able to withstand and with what I'm able to cope, and to realistically make adjustments and changes and take responsibility for what it is that I'm doing. So I found this exercise, I've been doing it for the last 2 months now, I've found it to be tremendously helpful for me. Changed the way that I look at everything. I would highly recommend that you give it a go. The method is called the Wim Hof method. You can speak to me about it if you want more information. It's really helpful. Cool. Any questions? Brilliant. That means I covered everything.